Chapter 10, What time will he be on the green cloud? You are listening at Novel Full.audio. It seems like I didn't do anything wrong. Chen Chongsheng looked at the mid-aged woman and said, since I didn't do anything wrong, then why do I have to change so much? After saying this, his expression did not change, but his breathing had unnoticeably become slightly heavier. Only those who knew him well enough would know that these details indicated he was already very angry. The mid-aged woman's face became serious and said, "Aren't you afraid of death?" "I am very afraid of death." Chen Chongsheng's voice was as hard as iron. Therefore the first thing I planned to do when I came to the capital was to cancel the engagement at the Divine General's estate. Even yesterday I was preparing to cancel the engagement after getting into Heavenly Academy or Star Taker Academy, but sorry, now I have truly changed my mind. The mid-aged woman stared at him. Her eyes became slightly cold. Chen Chongsheng looked back at her quietly and said, "Unless you realize what you did wrong, remember my name." The mid-aged woman remained silent for a really long time. "Actually, I favor you very much." She looked at Chen Chongsheng. The emotion in her eyes was somewhat complicated. For these past few days I had always been observing your life. I have never seen a youngster who was so good at self-regulating, and in the 4 entrance exams, what you showed was very rare. You deserve praise. That I sometimes would even think, if I have a daughter, it should be a good choice to marry her to you. Chen Chongsheng didn't know what to say, but he was praised by someone. He felt that he should reply, so he thought for a while and said 2 words, "Thank you." Picking this moment to say thank you was somewhat ironic, cute, and very respectable. The mid-aged woman looked at the wall behind the school's gate and said, "But unfortunately, in the entire world no one thinks the young lady should marry you." Chen Chongsheng followed her sight and saw many names on the green stone wall. This was the back of the main entrance to the academy, therefore this couldn't be the list of people who got accepted. Then what was this list? He suddenly remembered that he saw similar lists on the back of the entrance to Heavenly Academy and Star Taker Academy. There were many names carved on top of them. There was a sentence carved on the topmost of the green stone wall, "The strong gale will offer strength, and I will enter the azure cloud." After reading this sentence, Chen Chongsheng thought back to the records in the books, and knew the list of names carved on the green stone wall was the mythical proclamation of azure clouds. There were countless powerful cultivators on this continent, but geniuses always start when they were young. The proclamation of azure clouds was the tier list for cultivators under the age of 20. All of the people who entered the proclamation were either the core students of different countries, different sects, different academies, or geniuses who held special talents. If they didn't die in the middle of seeking the way, then these people would all become cultivators with true strength. The reason for the academies in the capital to put up the proclamation of azure clouds was to use the famous names on the list and give the students a model to chase after and enhance the connection between schoolmates. But the effect wasn't as well as they expected. The students knew they had no chance to enter the proclamation, so they were only respectful, jealous, or even fearful of those names on the list. The proclamation of azure clouds didn't care about people's knowledge, level, sect, gender, but only strength. The single limitation was that the people who entered the proclamation cannot be older than 20 years of age. There were a few times in the past where a lower-level cultivator had won against higher-level ones and were immediately placed in front. This condition was despised by many. When the Council of Divine Ordinance first created the ranking, this condition was questioned many times, but the answer of the Council was simple and powerful: no matter knowledge, level, or even manner and characteristics, all mixed together with strength. The condition of the proclamation was to test strength, and the best way to test it was victory and defeat. Chen Chongsheng glanced over the names on the proclamation. Those names were strange to him. Sometimes he could even see some weird names, and they probably belonged to young cultivators from Yao territory, and some genius from the southern forest. Suddenly, he saw Tang Tang's name on the 36th spot. Chen Chongsheng thought back to Heavenly Academy and the blue-shirt youngster explaining the story of his name, Tang 36. Chen Chongsheng laughed happily. He was proud of him. Finally, his eyes landed upon the highest point of the list, and saw the only name that stood there. The name on top appeared to be lonely, cold, and proud. He knew that name, he knew the name very well, Su Yu Rong. The proclamation of azure clouds lists all the young geniuses all over the world. The Zhou dynasty is full of talented people. Even just in the capital there are more than 10 people on the list. 4 people from Heavenly Academy, 3 from Star Taker Academy. But it's not especially well, when comparing to the Longevity Sect and Scholartree Manor in the south. It wasn't until the young lady of the estate entered the proclamation did the north and south even out. The middle-aged woman looked at the list and her pride could easily be seen, but of course she didn't need to hide her pride. She said, 2 years ago my lady entered the proclamation for the first time and entered first place. From that day onward she never got lowered in her ranking. The young geniuses behind her couldn't compete. No, it was too difficult for them to even approach her. Chen Chongsheng looked at the name on top of the list and remained speechless. These 4 years he kept the marriage vow on him and he read it many times. He knew her name and knew how old she was. After calculating, this Miss Su entered the proclamation at the age of 12 and was invincible. The bloodline of Sky Phoenix was truly miraculous. The middle-aged woman looked at Chen Chongsheng and said sincerely, "You are talented. Although you have yet to reach purification you still have the ability to enter those academies. But, you are too different from my lady. It's not about effort, it's not about talent, and trying doesn't matter either. You are continuing to climb up in your life, and I believe you will be able to climb to a very high peak. But my lady has already left that place. If you want to stubbornly chase after her, then the only thing you will receive is raging lightning from heaven." Chen Chongsheng was silent. He thought about Shuang Er, the maid he met in the forest, and the man she mentioned before. The genius who was the reincarnation of the heavenly dragon and was recognized by everyone on the continent as the perfect fit for Su Yu Rong. Qiu Shanjun. The middle-aged woman didn't expect him to know the existence of Qiu Shanjun. She said emotionlessly, Qiu Shanjun had been the champion of the proclamation. Chen Chongsheng asked, why did he leave the proclamation? Was it because he didn't want to lose to Miss Su? The middle-aged woman replied, 2 years ago, Qiu Shanjun passed the peak stage of meditation, now he is the champion of the proclamation of golden distinction. Chen Chongsheng sighed. He noticed that it was hard to find any relief from this information because the people on the proclamation are all above him. He himself couldn't even go on the board of acceptance. Speak less of the proclamation of azure clouds. They were truly living in different worlds when compared to Chen Chongsheng. He asked, previously you said the difference between me and Miss Su isn't in talent or effort, then what is it? The middle-aged woman answered, that it's destiny. Even if you are the best ordinary person out there, you are still just an ordinary person. When my lady was born, she wasn't an ordinary person. You were born as a human, but she was born as a phoenix. The difference between you two is that of the sky and the earth. So that it's destiny once again. Chen Chongsheng sighed once again. After remaining silent for a long time, he looked at the woman and said seriously, perhaps you don't believe me but the reason I came to the capital was to change my destiny. Although it's not about the marriage, destiny has no believability to me. The woman was stunned. She didn't expect that Chen Chongsheng would still not let go of the marriage vow after she explained the situation clearly. As the sun was setting to the west, Chen Chongsheng followed the crowd and walked to the other side of the street. The middle-aged woman noticed, at first his head was a little low and his back a little bent. It seemed he was lonely and tired. But after a short period of time had passed, his back became straight and he raised his head. Once again he looked at the crowd on the street and the setting sun far away. The dawning light shone on the youngster. It seemed as if he was burning. I have never seen a youngster this self-disciplined. He controlled every aspect of his life. He has no harmful habits nor entertainment. He values time greatly. He values it so greatly that I feel like there was always someone chasing him. But he didn't let anyone around him feel irritated or hurried. It's easy to see that he enjoys living or life itself. Except he has a little misophobia. The first day, I saw him wash his hands a total of 7 times, and he probably has more than 5 handkerchiefs. At the divine general's estate, the middle-aged woman stood in front of Madame Su and said expressionlessly, "Madam, I must say that this child is talented. If he has a chance, he will grow quickly. If he's lucky, then he will have a bright future before him." Madame Su never thought that the loyal woman who had followed her for many decades would speak for the youngster. She wrinkled her eyebrows and asked, "What are you trying to say?" The middle-aged woman replied, "Of course Our Lady won't marry him, but if we continue insulting and oppressing him like this, it's better if we just kill him. If he actually got the chance and becomes strong, even if the mansion is not afraid of him, it's still troublesome. In addition that I really think that youngster is nice. Why do this to him?" This logic might be difficult to understand for normal people, but Madame Su understood her. She didn't realize that the woman actually liked Chen Chongsheng. And she thought back to the words Su Shiji had spoken to her at night in the study room. Madame Su looked deeply at her and said, "There are too many people watching the divine general's estate. Especially the stubborn elders. If there is any ugly news from the estate, even if it won't affect our reputation, Her Divine Majesty would still not like it. Therefore this thing should be undertaken carefully. It would be for the best if we can use peaceful negotiations to obtain the marriage vow. But if that youngster still wants to maintain his pitiful pride to the very end, or if he wants to obtain more benefits from this, then he should die silently. Even if it will cause some trouble, it's another way to get rid of the source of trouble." Shuang Er returned to her room and her mind went blank for a while. Thinking back to the conversation she heard outside of the madam's room, her felt irritated and insecure. Even after she drank half a bowl of cold tea, she couldn't calm down. She knew the reason she could have heard the entire conversation was that the madam allowed her to. The madam knew that she contacted the young lady of the estate regularly, and thus, let her hear the conversation on purpose. The madam wanted her to inform the young lady of this matter. But even if the young lady won't marry that guy named Chen Chongsheng, was it really necessary to do this? Would her lady accept this? Shuang Er walked to her table and laid a sheet of paper flat on its surface. She picked up a brush and sank it into the dark ink. After thinking a little, she started writing a letter. Chapter 11, These Two Kids. You are listening at novelfull.audio. It was still the beginning of spring, but today, it was already hot. Chen Chongsheng didn't know if it was due to the weather or his emotions. When he returned to the inn, he found that his clothes were wet from his sweat and had become dirty from the dirt. He felt even more upset because he liked to be clean, until he saw that person. The person was a youngster with green shirt, who was standing in the middle of the inn lobby. He slightly lifted his lower jaw, kept a cold face, and wasn't concerned by how much inconvenience his actions would bring to others at all. He was as arrogant as a wild crane, whose eyes did not see the chickens heading down and eating. This inn was located close to the mausoleum of books, so the population passing by was huge. It was lunchtime now and the people who walked in and out of the inn were like tidewater, yet no one dared to get close to the youngster. The green-shirt youngster was like the lonely Peristelli in the Luo Canal, tide split apart right after encountering it. This image looked strange. Chen Chongsheng knew this green-shirt youngster, but people in the inn didn't know. The strange image happening now was definitely due to the interaction that happened between them before. He felt a little surprised. Why was he here now? Presumably, he was seeking Chen Chongsheng, yet what did he want? Chen Chongsheng walked up to the green-shirt youngster, did a gesture of greeting and then stayed silent because he did not know what to say. The green-shirt youngster was Tang 36, whom Chen Chongsheng had met once during Heavenly Academy's entrance exam. His name came from his rank on the Proclamation of Azure Clouds. Interestingly, he and Chen Chongqing both were not good at interacting with others. After returning the gesture, Tang 36 also did not know what to say, so immediately there was an awkward silence between them. The inn was soundless. People did not dare to irritate Tang 36. Many of them looked down and ate, not daring to make any sound, and even more they did not dare to chat. Yet many visions fell on the two youngsters. People were curious on what was going to happen next. Awkward silence was a very embarrassing thing. Awkward silence under many people was even more embarrassing, especially to Tang 36. He had who wanted to show his friendly, mature side to Chen Chongsheng. Fortunately, he was slightly older than Chen Chongsheng. After thinking for a bit, he eventually thought of a method to solve the situation and said, "A guest came. Why don't you invite me to sit?" Chen Chongsheng was shaken awake. He led him into his room, took out around 10 silver taels, called over a waiter to serve a cup of good tea. Shortly, the tea was ready. A pot of tea was placed on a desk. The 2 cups were poured up to 70%. Chen Chongqing said, "Please," then there was the awkward silence again. A long silence was truly embarrassing. Tang 36 could not bear it any longer and said openly, "You still didn't get into any." Chen Chongqing replied honestly, "I did not make it for the 4th time." Tang 36 remained silent for a while and said, "I know that it's the divine general of the Eastern Decrees estate who is interfering with you in the back." Chen Chongqing looked up. He felt surprised that Tang 36 actually knew the inside story of his problems, but he did not know how much he knew. With such uncertainty, his vision naturally became somewhat different. In Tang 36's impression, Chen Chongqing was a talented, friendly, and determined normal person. Now he suddenly found that this kid's vision was as sharp as a knife edge. He involuntarily felt surprised, slightly narrowed his eyes, becoming even more interested in the things Chen Chongqing were hiding. What made Tang 36 depressed was that, after he said the words, "Divine General of the Eastern Decrees Estate," Chen Qing apparently felt touched. Yet he didn't say the answer he wanted, but instead remained silent like a useless quail. He felt a bit irritated. 2 eyebrows lifted up like swords coming out of their sheaths and he yelled, "Don't you feel angry? Don't you feel mad?" Chen Chongqing looked up and gave him a glance before he slowly rolled his eyes. Tang 36 was drinking tea when he saw the look. He almost spat out the tea in his mouth. He didn't expect that the traditional or even conservative kid would have such a childish face. Chen Chongqing thought, "I felt so depressed that I was about to die, but why do I have to let you know?" Even the engagement, he did not prepare to let others know, much less the 4 unjust entrance exams that had happened due to the engagement. The engagement, until now, was still a secret between the Divine General's estate and himself. Even though the Divine General's estate had consecutively interfered with him and the mid-aged woman's words made him very angry, he still did not want to publicly announce the engagement to the world. It's not because he was afraid of the threats from the Divine General's estate or because he was afraid of getting killed by them, but simply because he believed that, after all, he would return the engagement to the Divine General's estate. Thus, why would he announce it to everyone? Miss Su might be arrogant and cold, just as evil as her parents, but if the Divine General's estate apologized later on, why would he give a girl difficulty marrying later on? Yes, he believed that, after all, he would cancel the engagement because he strongly believed that the Divine General's estate would apologize to him one day. Moreover, he did not want others to know his name because of Miss Su. It was probably arrogance, probably stubbornness, but he wanted to insist on it. His view of this world was still insistent on walking upon the path named innocence. Interestingly, even though Chen Chongqing did not say anything and Tang 36 did not know anything, he approximately understood Chen Chongqing's intention. For no reason, he felt deep admiration. He finished the tea in one gulp, patted Chen Chongqing's shoulder and said, "I admire you. Even though he was the young genius who ranked 36th on the proclamation of Azure Cloud, was the one who stood in the crowd like a wild crane, with no one daring to interrupt, he was still a youngster. Because of this, Tang 36's action appeared somewhat pretentious, and when he was saying this sentence, his vision and attitude all seemed somewhat arrogant. If it was others, they might feel very uncomfortable, and some might even feel angry. However, Chen Chongqing did not. He understood that Tang 36 was trying to show friendship and comfort, but because he wasn't used to such actions it had come out somewhat awkwardly. BVEC Chen Chongqing said, "Thank you." Tang 36 said, "Verbal gratitude is not enough, you should treat me." It was another very awkward yet friendly expression. Chen Chongqing suddenly felt pity for this kid. He thought that this kid had probably cultivated for his entire life. No wonder he was at such high level at such young age, but the way he interacted with others was really terrible. He felt worried about how Tang 36 would live in the future. Chen Chongqing was always very focused when he was thinking, which made him seem somewhat dull and inflexible. Tang 36 looked at him and couldn't help but shake his head. He felt pity for this kid, thinking that this kid had probably been reading books for his entire life. No wonder he would remember so many doctrines at such a young age. But the way Chen Chongqing interacted with others was really terrible. He felt worried about how Chen Chongqing would live in the future. LOL like attracts like. It takes one genius to understand another. In short, both had no right to feel pity for the other, yet both were feeling pity right now. Thus, another interaction between the two began after the initial one at Heavenly Academy. Chen Chongqing called the waiter over to see the menu. He calculated that the money his master gave him and the money his senior gave him privately, was enough for him to stay in the capital for a good few years. Then he stopped thinking and pushed the menu toward Tang 36 and said, "Pick whatever you want, and asterisk, this is my first time treating someone." He did not know that this sentence made Tang 36 feel even more pity for him, thinking, which remote mountain did this kid come from? Chapter 12, A Friend That Leaves You Wordless, Part 1, You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chen Chongqing said to pick any dish, and in Tang 36's point of view these words had two meanings. The two words, pick any, means choose any food without restraint and interact freely with me. Both meanings were about the same but slightly different. Although Tang 36 felt pity for Chen Chongqing, he was not really concerned about the prices when picking. He grabbed the menu and casually picked several specialties of the inn. The first two dishes were flying sparrow soup and steamed double-headed fish. While he was ordering, he glanced toward Chen Chongqing and noticed that his eyebrows were frowned. Thinking that he didn't have enough money and with a hint of regret, he said to the waiter, "No more double-headed fish, change it to bass, and also change the flying sparrow soup to veggie soup." As expected, Chen Chongqing's eyebrows unfolded. Tang 36 smiled, thinking that sure enough he had observed Chen Chongqing in detail and understood him. "Let me get another bowl of plum blossom deer cake." Chen Chongqing frowned. Tang 36 glanced him, said, "Change it, give me a braised pork with preserved vegetable in soy sauce." Chen Chongqing still frowned. Tang 36 felt a bit unhappy, thinking that just a bowl of pork which I wouldn't even eat at home. "How are you not willing to pay this?" He spoke to the waiter, "Give me a dish of steamed lotus root with a plate of barbecue pig ears." Chen Chongqing still kept the same face of disagreement. Tang 36 felt really annoyed and said, "Since you are treating people for the first time, you don't understand the way of interacting with people." "I won't say anything." Chen Chongqing felt a little surprised and asked, "What did I do wrong?" Tang 36 yelled. "Even if you don't have enough money, you still shouldn't reveal such an attitude in front of guests. It is really irritating. As men, heads can be severed, blood can be drained, but reputation cannot be lost. Even if you have to sell your fur coat later, why should it matter?" Tang 36 thought that this reason was very appropriate and very good for educating friends, but for Chen Chongqing it sounded weird. Chen Chongqing asked, isn't it slapping one's face until it's swollen in an effort to look imposing? Tang 36 felt a little annoyed and said, what kind of saying is that? It is the common saying from Xining. Chen Chongqing explained seriously. Tang 36 felt stunned, thinking that this was not what he asked. He was about to get angry, but then he heard Chen Chongqing's next sentence. Also, I don't have a fur coat. The room became quiet. Tang 36 forgot about getting mad. Instead, what he felt was worry and pity for this kid. He felt that Chen Chongqing was very pitiful. He often saw the poor elders in his family sell fur coats or flood dragon robes in exchange for wine, but no one had told him how to treat others when they themselves are so poor that they don't even have fur coats or flood dragon robes. How can one treat others without losing face? Because Tang 36 never lacked money and had never treated others before, he didn't know the answer. He looked at Chen Chongqing and said seriously, I will treat you this time. Chen Chongqing felt a bit surprised and asked, why? Tang 36 looked at him and said in a friendly tone, you don't even have a fur coat, then you most likely don't have any other expensive things. So I should not let you treat me. Chen Chongqing felt innocent and said, but that I have money. Another awkward silence. Tang 36's face turned gloomy and replied. Then while I was picking before, why did you keep that face? Chen Chongqing thought about the previous scene and realized something. He felt somewhat sorry and explained, because the flying sparrow soup you picked is known for being nourishing, but in reality it's too hot for the body. It's good to eat it in the fall or winter, but it's currently spring and drinking that soup is bad for your health. TL. Walking Encyclopedia. Tang 36 had never thought that Chen Chongqing was thinking about these kind of trifling matters and asked, are the other foods also bad? Those are the signature dishes. Double-headed fish are from deep ocean. It feeds on fish, shrimp, and sea snakes, so it should have a lot of toxins in its body. If it's boiled, then it's fine. If the cook skimmed its fat from the soup, it will still be edible, but the steamed ones are bad for your health. Also, there's only 2 of us. Eating too much meat is also bad for your health, especially the braised pork with preserved vegetable in soy sauce. It uses streaky pork, which contains too much fat, and it's better not to eat it. Chen Chongqing lastly added, the pig ears in barbecued pig ears are good stuffs, but barbecue sauce is really bad. Furthermore, that plate of lotus root, if you eat too much, it will hurt your intestine and heart, which is also bad for your health. Stop. Tang 36 couldn't bear listening to it any longer. Chen Chongqing's words were like flies buzzing around his ears. It made him feel so uncomfortable. No matter who, listening to so many lines of, it's bad for your health, after happily ordering food, they would feel unhappy. Of course not every food could be healthy, but who would notice these details when eating? And who would notice them in such strict way? If Chen Chongqing was an old man who is especially concerned about longevity, it's fine, but he was only a 14-year-old young man. Why does bad for health even matter? Surely you won't die after eating them. Chen Chongqing said seriously, you won't die right away, but you will definitely die young. Tang 36 had nothing to say. He asked curiously, then what do you normally eat? Chen Chongqing replied. 100 grams of meat, best would be beef or goat, 1 kilogram of veggies, best will be wild veggies, some sweet potatoes and food grains, 1 brook fish every 2 days, best if it has scales, and no soup. Tang 36 asked, how long have you been eating like this? Chen Chongqing replied naturally, I have been eating like this since I can remember. Now it was Tang 36's turn to frown. He felt that these foods were not tasty simply from listening to the names. If he really had to eat them for 14 years, then how poor was his life? He found that he felt even more pity for this kid. While eating, both of them were very silent. Tang 36 thought that the foods were too common, but Chen Chongqing thought that the foods were too unhealthy. After all, they both had their own dissatisfactions. Of course, this was something that couldn't be compromised from the beginning, just like tofu pudding and zongzi, sticky rice dumplings, taste and health, had always been something where humans' point of views clashed into each other the most. Chen Chongqing's first experience in his life of treating someone ended roughly like this. 2 cups of tea were put up. The two casually talked about what happened during Heavenly Academy's entrance exam. Tang 36 also asked on what Chen Chongqing encountered at the other 2 schools. He also could not understand how the Zhou military would be influenced by the divine general's estate. Then, once again, there wasn't anything left to converse about. New friends would usually talk about their childhood stories and experience of growing up. They found some common hobbies, but both of their childhood stories were simple and boring to a scary extent, so they could not get more familiar from this part. To avoid the awkward moment of eyes staring at each other, Tang 36 stood up. He walked around the room while holding a cup of tea. He walked from the hall to the balcony, then came back. Thinking that this kid could rent such a big suite near the mausoleum of books showed that he did not lack money, so his own previous misunderstanding was truly somewhat embarrassing. While passing by the shelf in the lobby, Tang 36's eyes subconsciously fell on the shelf. His eyes could not leave the object on the shelf. There was a sword. That sword was small and exquisite, seemingly not much longer than a regular dagger, and very thin. It appeared very delicate. The scabbard was a regular fur sheath and the handle was also very simple. From inside to outside it showed a sense of regularity. There was nothing noticeable, no dirt or blood. After all, this sword was extremely normal, but it attracted him to go near it. Tang 36 had extended his hand to hold the hilt. But before his hand could reach for the hilt, Chen Chongqing's hand blocked his way and grabbed the hilt in his hand first. Tang 36 glanced at him. Chen Chongqing looked at him and said, "This is mine." Tang 36 was holding the cup. There was hot air coming out of the cup. In the air his handsome face appeared to be cold, "So I can't touch it." Chen Chongqing noticed his unhappiness and felt a bit worried, but he still insisted and said, "You should ask me first, and if I agree, then you can take it." Tang 36 took back his right hand and flicked his sleeve as he sat back. He put the cup back on the table in front of him. Chen Chongqing felt somewhat embarrassed, thinking that he had probably done something wrong. Fine, he didn't think he did something wrong, but this was the first friend he had, so he felt worried and flustered when he saw that Tang 36 was unhappy. He walked to the table, delivering the short sword up. Tang 36 looked up and glanced at him without saying a word. Chen Chongqing pushed the sword even closer. Tang 36 was unwilling to accept the sword and said, behaving in such a non-manly way. Chen Chongqing could not help but think, who was really the non-manly one? Who was the one acting like a child and getting angry right now? He was lost for words and did not know what to do. So he walked to the shelf and put the sword back. He turned back and asked, "Do you have anything to talk to me about? In the capital you are the only person I know. After hearing of your experience, of course I had to come and see. You are welcome, I am such a friendly and enthusiastic person." Tang 36 said indifferently. "Of course, this is established upon the basis that I admire you. You have to know, I barely admire anyone in my age. You should feel proud." Chen Chongqing was stupefied and then said, "Thank you. Just a thank you is enough. Didn't I just treat you?" Tang 36 stood up to look at him and said, "I've decided to accept you as my follower." Chen Chongqing asked, "What do you mean by follower?" Tang 36 explained very seriously, "It means that you can follow me from now on." Chen Chongqing explained seriously, "Sorry, I have a lot of things to do and I can't give any of my time to you." Tang 36 was a really arrogant youngster, but he felt sympathetic to Chen Chongqing's experiences, so he had come to visit. Since the opposite side didn't say much, he obviously wouldn't say more. But he was somewhat confused. What thing? Continue taking the exams. Why do you have to get into the school? What's your reason to insist on trying? Chen Changxing asked, how about you? What's your goal for coming to the capital? I want to participate in the grand examination. I want to get first place. Tang 36 said indifferently. Suddenly, he remembered the young phoenix at the south's holy maiden peak. If she came back early. I want to get second place in the grand examination. He corrected himself, but suddenly he remembered Qiu Shanjun. If that person participated in this year's examination. Okay, my goal is third place in the grand examination. Tang 36 finally said, with certainty, but after all, I want to write down my name on the tablet in front of the mausoleum of books. Great goal, I admire you. Chen Changxing looked at him and applauded. Suddenly he remembered something and asked, by that time won't you have to change your name to Tang 3? Tang 36 didn't know what to say. He changed the topic and asked, and you? What's your goal for coming to the capital? Chen Changxing said honestly, I also want to participate in the grand examination. Tang 36 didn't expect that, but he was not so surprised. Chen Changxing said, I've never thought of getting second or third place. Tang 36 encouraged him, people have to know their own limits, but they can't lose their confidence. Don't forget, as long as you get into the top 3 grades in the grand examination, you can go to the mausoleum of books. Speaking to this point, his voice stopped because Chen Changxing spoke again. I want to get first place. Chen Changxing looked at him and said, I can't get second or third, I can only get first place. Complete silence. Tang 36 suddenly had the urge to turn around and leave. He realized that he was often forced into a situation where he was left speechless today. Because what this kid did and said, often made others not know what to say, only wanting to vomit blood. TL. Ah, this is why I love our MC. Chapter 13, A Friend That Leaves You Wordless, Part 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. If my observations aren't wrong, you should be an ordinary person. Yes, I haven't officially started cultivating the grand examinations. First place. Yes, I can only get first place. Tang 36's question was straightforward and sharp, but Chen Changxing's answer was serious and calm. It was like describing an extremely basic thing. Like how people should eat both meat and vegetables to keep balance within their body, don't eat things that are too salty or oily, and should sleep early and wake up early. They would have a healthy body this way. Life was eat, drink, digest, and sleep. It's not wrong. This attitude of viewing something formal as everyday life is nice, but the problem is, getting first place in the grand examination is not your ordinary everyday life. Since he could only get first place, then he will get first place. This statement seemed logical and understandable, but it didn't make any sense. Just like how a weak child could say he wants to pull out a whisker of the most powerful golden dragon and use it as a sword. It's a nice fairy tale, but if someone actually said that in real life, it would only be regarded as sleep talking. That person would be treated as mentally retarded or an idiot. Of course, he may also be a genius like no other. There is a fine line between a genius and an idiot, and that line is probability itself. Then which side should a person like Chen Changxing, who disregarded the line and believed in himself no matter what, be placed? Tang 36 is prideful and narcissistic, but today, he found a person who seemed as if he should be calm or perhaps stiff, innocent or perhaps naive, that made him feel an ultimate annihilation in the field of pride and narcissism. Speaking logically, foolish words from an idiot can't move a true genius like him, but the problem was, when Chen Changxing said a silly thing like this with his sincere and determined eyes, Tang 36 couldn't rebuke or mock him. In the depths of his heart, he felt that the possibility of the impossible actually happening, might truly exist. Why was this? He has never met a person like Chen Changxing before. He did things correctly in a correct way, therefore he was bold and he is righteous. Therefore you can't find a way to reply to his comment. This wordless feeling, that's why Tang 36 didn't reply and held his speech to himself. If Tang 36 knew that Chen Changsheng left Madame Su, the middle-aged woman, and that made Shuang heir at the divine general's estate, wordless as well, then he would feel comfort and become sympathetic towards them. After finishing the tea and almost eating the tea leaves in the cup, Tang 36 finally woke up from the previous shock. He looked at Chen Changsheng, whose expression didn't change in the slightest, as if he hadn't said the previous sentence. Tang couldn't help but shake his head and think to himself, this guy seems more interesting than I had thought. There is not even a year of time left. Although I respect your desire, speaking logically, I really can't give you any words of blessing because that would make me seem fake. I only want to warn you, the divine general's estate won't easily give up. Tang 36 didn't know what grudge was between Chen Changsheng and the divine general's estate, but he thought that the capital was under the divine empress rule. If the divine general's estate used some down-low tactics to interrupt Chen Changsheng's future, they wouldn't do anything that was way out of hand. Chen Changsheng was silent for a while and then spoke, I will try to avoid them. Tang 36 asked, but are you able to? Even Star Taker didn't accept you. Chen Changsheng answered, this is the thing I didn't understand. Tang 36 said, the divine general's estate can't affect Star Taker Academy, Su Shiji has no ability to do that. I heard. Someone at the palace spoke, that's why I'm really curious about your problem with the divine general's estate. What is the secret that even managed to drag the palace into this matter? Now Chen Changsheng knew the reason why Star Taker Academy didn't accept him. He felt shocked and was left speechless. After returning to his senses, he felt much better. The Star Taker Academy that he respected so much was facing an invincible force. That's why they did some disrespectful actions. The next question was, why was there the invincible force? Let's not speak of the faraway and mysterious West Continent. There were many preeminent places on the central continent that ordinary citizens cannot approach. For example, the big factions in the south, the Snow City in the north. But since Zhou dynasty led the humans to victory in the war against demon race, the Zhou Empire's imperial palace became the most invincible power. Rumors said that there were countless cultivators guarding the palace. Other rumors said that there was an old eunuch that was at the Star Fusion realm. Some rumors even said that there was a loyal and powerful giant dragon. In his 14 years of life, Chen Changsheng had read many things about the imperial palace through literature, but he never thought that he would have relationship with this powerful, fearful, and far-reaching place. Thinking about the words Tang 36 said, he was wordless, he didn't understand. There are countless dogs serving the divine empress, Su Shiji is a relatively scary one. But even he had no way to move the people in the imperial palace to put pressure on Star Taker Academy. Even if he could, he wouldn't have needed to use so much of his resources. Then, something he didn't need to use too many resources on, but the people at the palace would be willing to do voluntarily. Speaking up to this point, Tang 36's clouded mind suddenly became clear. Looking at the young face of Chen Changsheng, his thoughts were a little messy. Did this guy who didn't even know how to treat a guest, really not have a connection with the phoenix? He was on the verge of asking Chen Changsheng what was going on. But today he had learned of Chen Changsheng's temperament. Since he was unwilling to speak, then no matter what happens he wouldn't say anything. At last, Tang 36 said, the most important figure at the divine general's estate has always been her. You have to know this. After saying this sentence, he looked at Chen Changsheng's eyes for a long time. Chen Changsheng was silent for a long time and suddenly he asked, what kind of person is she? Tang 36's expression didn't change, but a tsunami rose in his heart. From this sentence of Chen Changsheng's and the slight change in his expression when he said the words, Tang 36 knew that there was trouble between him and that phoenix. But he still didn't know what kind of problem it was. It's hard to describe her as a person. There is nothing special with her personality in rumors or from other people's descriptions. said Tang 36, realizing that it was hard to explain. Then he saw Qin Chongsheng's eyes and suddenly realized something. She is very similar to you. She is also a person that makes others speechless. Of course, the reason for you making others wordless is that your attitude is too calm and your words are too direct. People feel so melancholic after hearing you speak that they want to cough blood. Rumors say she doesn't talk much and doesn't appear in front of others often either. But she is similar to you, she also makes people cough blood. Qin Chongsheng was confused. She doesn't need to speak, she doesn't need to mock, she doesn't need to look down on others. She just needs to exist. She just needs to stand there and it is enough for people to be melancholic and cough blood. I will speak the truly, those people include me. She had the bloodline of the Sky Phoenix and awakened herself when she was very little. Her way of cultivation was smooth and she is intelligent. Despite her talent, her effort is also top-notch as well. Everything about her is of the best. Don't you think people like that are out of hand? Even a genius like me feels hopeless in front of her. A person like this, that leaves others speechless is truly hateful. Tang 36 looked at him and said, both of you are friends that leave others speechless. But your ways are completely different. She is truly special. Many people think that perhaps only Qiu Shanjun can face this kind of girl and be calm. After finishing his sentence and seeing that Qin Chongsheng didn't say anything, he then said his goodbye and left the tavern. After the blue-shirt youngster left, Qin Chongsheng cleaned the table until there was no dust left upon it. He didn't go wash himself or read a book, which was rare. He walked to the center of the yard and moved a bamboo chair under a tree. He looked at the beautiful stars in the sky through the scattered leaves and flowers. There was no expression on his face. He had heard the names of Su Yurong and Qiu Shangjun once again. Although his expression didn't change, his mood did. Putting everything aside, he was still a teenager. Although he disliked the sour feeling, it had risen from within his heart twice since he arrived at the capital. He was angry that he failed to be accepted by the academies 4 times due to the diving general's estate. The Imperial Palace sent people to pressure Star Taker Academy, not for the Divine General but for her, which made him angrier. With the anger on top of the sour feeling, he realized that he disliked that girl named Su Yurong more and more. When he was little and lived in the temple, he said to his senior that he may hate people, but he wouldn't dislike them. But now he started to dislike that young girl. Yes, even if she was the genius. The Sky Phoenix that left all the geniuses from different factions speechless, in Qin Chongsheng's mind she was still a little girl. He remembered very clearly, she was born on the 11th of November and that she was younger than him by 3 days. Even if she was younger than him by 1 day she was little, let alone 3 days. He really disliked that woman named Su Yurong. Qin Chongsheng's mood became worse and worse. He thought to himself, why did Master arrange such a marriage for him? He got off the chair and took out a scroll made of bamboo from his belt and put it into the deepest box in his luggage. Then he started to wash his face and hands. After washing himself clean, his mood got much better. There was a marriage vow in that box. He had received the little thing made out of bamboo from the capital when he was 11 years old. He remembered the white crane that had delivered the message along with the vow. He remembered the words in the letter and he remembered, after that day, the white crane never came again. Tonight. A white crane landed on top of Holy Maiden Peak in the south. Under a sky full of stars, a young girl sat next to the cliff. Chapter 14, Su Yurong. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the current era, the orthodoxy used the glory of the heavenly tomes to dominate the field of religion. Since the mausoleum of books was located in the capital, the altar was naturally also located in the capital. Before the Zhou dynasty came into power, all popes had come from the Shang dynasty. Now that the Shang had collapsed and Zhou had risen to power, every pope naturally came from Zhou. A dynasty built around the capital was already powerful, but it was also protected by the orthodoxy, which naturally made it become the center of the human world. Compared to the Shang dynasty and the Zhou dynasty, the southern central continent had multiple powers in it. There were many kingdoms, factions, and sections. Although they seemed to be scattered all over the place, the number of cultivators in each group couldn't be disregarded. It almost seemed as if the southern region had more cultivators than the Zhou dynasty had. Of these major powers in the southern region, the most influential were Holy Maiden Peak's Nanxi Institute, the Longevity Sect, and the clan of Qiu Shan. After ending the terrible and bloody war between humans and demons, the southern powers felt that they had sacrificed a lot and wanted to rise in power and status. They believed the Mausoleum of Books to be a holy artifact that belonged to the entire human world and shouldn't be controlled by the Zhou dynasty alone. In the same way, the interpretations of the heavenly tomes shouldn't be controlled by the Pope, who represented the orthodoxy. For this reason, the southern powers debated and argued with 3 emperors of the Zhou dynasty, previous and current, about the procedure and even the name of the grand examination. In addition, from within the orthodoxy, a split occurred, giving rise to the Southern faith. Although the Southern faith still belonged to the orthodoxy, it only viewed the Pope as a spiritual leader. Its affairs were actually handled by the Holy Maiden. Holy Maidens of the Southern faith were always the strongest cultivators. But because they needed to balance out the struggles between the multiple powers in the south and had no army for backup, their actual power and status was lower than that of the Northern Pope. Nevertheless, they were always the most respected and glorious characters in the South. They held the same power and status as the Northern Pope did, spiritually and religiously. Since the Holy Maiden of the Southern faith was such a special title and status, it was always appointed to a Southern lady. There hadn't been a single exception for several thousand years. Only up until now was there a possibility for an exception. Every Holy Maiden of the Southern faith came from the Nanxi, Southern Creeks, Institute. Because of this, the mountain that this sect was located on was named Holy Maiden Peak. And currently there is only one successor at the Nanxi Institute. That successor is a girl named Su Yurong. She is the reincarnation of the Sky Phoenix. Her talent in cultivation was unmatched. She understood the essence of the scriptures of the way and arrived at Holy Maiden Peak when she was just 12 years old. All of the teachers and masters of Holy Maiden Peak were shocked and disregarded her status as a Zhou citizen and announced to the whole world. She will be the only female disciple of the Nanxi Institute's inner circle. This meant that if there were to be no interference, this young girl named Su Yurong would become the next Holy Maiden of the Southern faith, a religious leader that can stand up to the North's Pope. The night was dark and heavy with stars scattered across the sky. They never seemed to move and yet they also seemed to relocate with every moment. The quietness was both enjoyable and scary. There was nothing but silence in the mountains during the night. Suddenly, a sharp chirp broke through the clouds and a white crane landed from the night sky. As starlight shone upon it, the white crane in the darkness seemed surreal, as if it were formed of paper and contained no dust. The scream of the crane filled the entire cliff. Perhaps it was because of the time, the night slowly faded into oblivion and white lights appeared on the eastern skyline. The dawn has arrived. The girl who sat on the cliff took down her luggage from the white crane and picked out the letter. She opened it without much care and read it silently. During the reading, her thin eyebrows raised a couple times, but she was mostly calm. The pupils reflected the weak sunlight like the surface of a lake. The beautiful complexion contained youth but no immaturity. Because the southern region is very humid, when the sunlight grew stronger, mist started to form. The light was scattered by the wet air and landed on her face, making it appear softer, thus, her visage didn't appear clearer, but it was all the more beautiful. This beauty contained a trace of holiness and righteousness. That kid is very strange. He claims to have come to cancel the engagement, but for some weird reasons, he regrets his decision. I don't know what is he trying to do. I originally thought he felt embarrassed and said so intentionally to feel better, but after a while I felt that this was not true because when he was speaking, he was very calm and without anger. Granny watched him for several days. I heard that this kid would wake up promptly at 5 o'clock in the morning every day. He, like a wooden man, treats everything seriously. Also he has mysophobia, sounds like those evil perverts you told me about before, and makes people scared. Fine, miss, I admit that he didn't look so bad. When I was talking to him, I thought he looked handsome, which making me feel close to him, but the scary thing was that that was my first time seeing him. That kid didn't speak of the engagement to the public or anyone else. I am not sure if he is smart or just stupid. Anyways, the family has always sent people to stalk him. Miss, I always thought that the kid is very hypocritical. He thinks so much and demands much more. I will take a look at the most current situation. If he still wants to twist the matter, His Grace, the Divine General, and the Madam may start preparing to do something. Miss, even though I think that kid doesn't deserve to die, I don't approve of his actions. He holds the engagement and mocks the domain, the estate, thinking he has a strong backing. I feel that he is full of vengeance. Furthermore, that I heard that the Chiu Shang clan will come to the capital next year to propose a marriage. What if that rascal tries to cause trouble? The young girl who sat on the cliff read the letter quietly. Her clothes fluttered along the morning wind. Her dark hair floated lightly like silk. They all added some awe-inspiring character to her beauty. After reading, she remained silent for a while and whispered to herself. He actually went to the capital. The white crane was waiting silently on a side while the girl was reading. Even when it was squatting down, it had half a man's height. After seeing the girl close the letter, the white crane turned around. It used its mouth to get a pen brush from somewhere, and the brush tip was filled with ink. The place where the ink was produced was unknown, but it actually emitted a cold fragrance. The girl smiled and touched the white crane's slippery thin neck. She took the pen brush and prepared to give a reply, but for a moment she did not know what to write. She had been close to her grandfather since a very young age. If her grandfather hadn't passed away, she might not have left the capital and came to the Nanshi Institute at the age of 12. Even the white crane by her side was given to her by her grandfather. If her grandfather wanted her to do something, she would definitely do it, but engagement was definitely not okay. The little Taoist priest from Xining village should have the last name of Chen. She slightly frowned, recalling the things she heard in childhood, realizing that she had no impression of the little Taoist priest. She remembered that her grandfather specifically asked the current pope to notarize the engagement. Only the male side could cancel the engagement. She then remembered what Shuang Er said in the letter. Her thin eyebrows stirred up a bit and she thought silently. Was that little Taoist priest really that bothersome and hypocritical? She remembered that when they were young, she didn't have the impression that he was that kind of person. She knew that many people in the capital, including her father, all wished that she would represent the Zhou dynasty and marry to the south, and that they would absolutely not allow the little Taoist priest to influence this. Even more extreme, they most likely would kill him if he tried. She thought that this little Taoist priest was truly stupid and dumb. Did he really think that he could gain an advantage from the divine general's estate simply because of his little cunning brain? Thinking of this point, she felt somewhat unhappy. Unhappiness was a rare feeling for her. She was not sure if it's because the little Taoist priest didn't know how to protect himself or. Fine, that little Taoist priest was truly irritating. Fine, no matter how much the little Taoist priest has changed, the engagement must be cancelled. Yet that there was no need to hurt him. With a sharp scream, the white crane carried the girl's 2 letters and flew away into the cloud. With the morning gale and sunlight, it flew to the distant capital. The girl placed her brush into the water and stood up. She walked on the cliff wearing a cotton shirt and placed her hands behind her back. Her eyes were young, but they were filled with an extraordinary attitude. She is the world's sole existing young phoenix. She is the next holy maiden of the southern faith. She is first upon the proclamation of azure clouds. She is Su Yurong. She was still innocent. She had a kind of innocence that was not mischievous but naive. She smiled brilliantly. The kind of brilliance she showed was not of emotion, but of spring wind. That she did not wish to care about the world and its people. What people considered to be related to her, were actually not related to her at all. Such as the engagement she was about to leave behind in her memories, and perhaps, even Chiu Shan-jun. She had to admit that Senior Chiu Shan-jun was very strong, to a nearly perfect extent. He was the best husband to have in everyone's eyes, but why did that matter to her? This was all very, very good, but this was not what she wanted. Of course, the little Taoist priest was even less of what she wanted. What she wanted to do now was to sit on the cliff and enjoy watching the snow, hearing the rain, reading, and more reading. Within books, there contained a grand Tao. One scroll already surpassed countless lovers. She solely concentrated on revering the way. Who could stop her? Chen Changsheng left the inn, walking to the second-to-last school on the roster his master gave him. He really wanted to know what Miss Su would do today to make him fail. Of course, even if he failed again, he wouldn't change his mind. What he had done ever since he was young was to watch the temple, sweep the snow, eat medicine, read, and more reading. Within books, there contained a grand Tao. One scroll already surpassed 1,000 mountains and seas. He solely concentrated on seeking the way. Who could stop him? Chapter 15, A Black Goat. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chen Changsheng walks in a very peculiar fashion. Its uniqueness was due to the fact that his walking manner was very robot-like. He always did things systematically, which included walking. He would always raise his legs a certain height, bend at a constant angle, and walk the same distance with each step. He looked straight forward and only looked at the places near him. He kept his chest up, not too pretentiously straightened up but to naturally look like a green pine tree. His dark hair was tied up tightly, which was no longer tied with a Taoist hair clasp, but instead casually tied with a fabric cloth, which showed meticulosity. His cloths were also very common. Because they were probably washed many times, they had turned white and were extremely clean. Even on the surface of his shoes, there wasn't any dirt, which was very cultured of him. As he walked, a short sword tied on his waist moved slightly back and forward. This sword, like him, was also very common. A few days ago, he kept this short sword in the inn. Today was his first time taking it with him. The common sword symbolized an uncommon meaning. During his conversation with the mid-aged lady, he learned that if Dongyu General's mansion really wanted to continue to do anything, this short sword was his preparation. Yet this short sword was like his personality, very regular and common, extremely unnoticeable. It could not be compared to the legendary, frozen, two ends, thorn. It wouldn't even compare to the weapons possessed by people walking on the sidewalk. So how could it help him? Outside of the inn, he unsurprisingly saw the carriage from the Dongyu General's mansion. Under the sunny sunshine, the bloody phoenix label on the wheel became much clearer, as if it were burning. The warhorse that possessed noble bloodline of unicorn, headed up arrogantly and looked down on him. Walking past that carriage, he held the handle of his short sword, but after a while he loosened his hand. After a long time, he finally arrived at the destination. He was somewhat surprised that his destination was actually so close to the royal palace. Standing by the street corner, he could clearly see the lofty royal buildings, and it seemed that he could even smell the scent of the palace's history. Walking into the 100-Blossom Street, his confusion intensified. Would a place so close to the royal palace actually hide a school? Then why was it so deserted? Finally, at the end of street, he saw the entrance door to the school. The walls on two sides were covered by ivies and sunlight passed through, leaving an extremely diluted and mottled shadow. There wasn't a name sign. Was the school here? He wanted to ask someone, but the street was very quiet. Unlike the crowded streets outside of the Heavenly Academy and Startacre Academy, the street had no one around. He stood for a long while, but still no one passed by. The only thing he could see around him was the broken school entrance door. This place was close to the royal palace, but it looked like a wasteland that no one would bother to ask. He walked to the wall beside the entrance door and pulled the dense ivy branches away. He eventually saw a word carved on the wall. That word was Gua, nation. The previously vivid paint in the deeply carved word had already faded away due to years of erosion. Even the wall's surface itself had a signal of exfoliation. Thinking about the name of the school, Chen Changsheng was slightly surprised. The words carved on the wall confirmed that the school he was looking for was really here. He couldn't help but feel even more confused. The previous schools his master chose for him were the most famous and excellent schools in the continent. Why was this school so deserted and quiet? When he was thinking, his hand still held the ivy. He then pulled it down again and saw the second word. It was the word Jiao, teach. He did not have time to feel depressed. He pulled the ivy that no one had taken care of for many years and slid down quickly. He then shook the dirt to fly up from the ground. Chen Changsheng walked back several steps to prevent himself from touching the dirt. The ivies fell and the dirt gradually settled. Shortly the wall that had not seen the sky for many years had finally appeared in front of people again. On the old wall 4 words were carved. The Traditional Academy. Name unsettled, the words deeply carved into the stone did not have much paint on it. Instead there were only stacked dirts and the dead leaves that fell from the ivies last year. The corners of the words were even eroded harshly by wind and rain. If people didn't look carefully enough, they wouldn't have seen the words that were carved. Staring at the wall, Chen Changsheng remained silent for a long time. He felt somewhat sad and frustrated. He who solely concentrated on the way of Xiu Xing would rarely show any emotions like now. Yes, now he just wanted to turn around and leave. Such a shabby school, even if he got in, how would it help his life? He looked up at the sky, ascertaining that there was still some time. He decided to take a look at this shabby school. If it was not good, then he would go to the last school on the roster. His hand touched the door and lightly pushed. Jiya. After many years, the Traditional Academy's entrance door was finally opened up again. The carriage from Dongyu General's mansion stopped by outside of the 100 Blossom Street. The arrogant white horse slightly lifted up his head and felt really bored. Inside the wagon, the mid-aged lady's feeling was not as calm as the horse's. She felt heavily confused. She whispered to herself, why did he come here? She understood clearly that the school located at the end of the 100 Blossom Street had already fallen, but she also knew that this youngster seemed to be very good at bringing people surprises. She didn't dare to neglect his actions. She pointed her finger lightly toward a direction indicating to the white horse to pull the wagon in, but at that moment, another carriage was driven across from the sideway blocking the front. The 100 Blossom Street was very narrow. It could only fit one carriage at a time. Now that the carriage brutally blocked in the front, the carriage from the general's mansion obviously couldn't enter. The mid-aged lady frowned slightly and felt somewhat unhappy. But because she knew that this place was really close to the royal palace, so she did not yell at the opponent to move away immediately. However, while the mid-aged lady didn't even get angry, the white horse could no longer bear it. It possessed unicorn's bloodline, how could it permit a little black donkey to block its way? He trotted up angrily and was about to shout and scare the other off, but the animal in front of the wagon slowly turned its head and gave it a glance. TL. I swore I thought the horse wasn't that arrogant, or maybe I read it wrong, but woe that one arrogant ass horse BC of his blood. O. It was not a black donkey, but a black goat. Its hair was as slippery as silk and apparently it was not a regular animal. The most surprising thing was its look, so deep and cold, like some legendary being above the cloud. If the white horse was noble because of its unicorn bloodline, then this black goat's elegance was entirely originated from itself. In front of the black goat, the white horse was like an easily irritated mischievous child and the goat was like one of the royal family standing high above the masses. That black goat turned around and gave him a glance. The white horse was about to shout angrily, but after seeing the black goat's cold and indifferent look, it immediately became quiet. Its eyes showed fear. His front hoof suddenly lost energy and could no longer support its heavy body. The white horse heavily fell on the ground. Its entire body was shaking and it did not dare to stand up. It was as if the white horse was submitting itself to the rule of the black goat. The mid-aged lady rushed out of the wagon. Seeing the white horse kneeling on the ground, she felt dumbfounded and could not say a word. This horse was the only son of the general's mount and was extremely arrogant all the time, but now it had become a coward. When she turned and saw the black goat, she suddenly remembered something. When she looked towards the green carriage again, she felt extremely horrified. She kneeled down as fast as she could and made a salute to the green carriage. Her face was pale and she didn't dare to speak at all. An old voice came out of the green carriage. "I want to go in first, does Hua Nanny have any problem?" Hearing this sound, the mid-aged lady felt slightly calmer. The person who came was not that girl, but the girl's nanny. As to why the nanny knew her last name was Hua, she did not have to think at all. Of course, she would know everything. Inside the green carriage was also a nanny, but compared to her, a nanny in the general's mansion, that nanny must be the most famous one in the capital. Even Zhou Tong, who scared off the royal family members, officials, and the generals, had to smile to this nanny if he met her, so why did she matter so much? Nanny must be joking. I did not recognize you before, so I did not show enough respect. I hope Nanny will accept my apology. The mid-aged lady spoke with a slightly shaken voice. She felt lucky that she did not criticize the carriage before, but even so she still did not dare to hide her previous disrespectful thoughts. Because according to legend, in front of that black goat, any concealment was seeking death. Moreover, she knew that only if she apologized would the nanny feel satisfied. If Dongyu General's mansion had not been closely related to that girl, she wouldn't even dare to explain right now, but instead chop off her hand as an apology. The nanny inside the green carriage asked, "Are you stalking that youngster?" The mid-aged lady did not dare to look up and carefully replied, "Yes." Until now she was sure that the girl in the palace had always known about these things. That nanny said, "You don't have to today." The mid-aged lady felt a bit surprised. With her head down, she asked with a shaking voice, "Can Nanny explain please?" The nanny's voice contained no emotion. "Do I have to explain everything to you?" The mid-aged lady bowed down as an apology and did not dare to say a word. That black goat glanced at her before it turned back and pulled that green carriage to the end of the 100 Blossom Street. It wasn't until after a really long time did the mid-aged lady dare to look up. Although she lifted her face off the ground, her face still looked pale. The nanny in the green carriage, indeed, did not have to explain anything to others. Even if the opponent was the general's mansion. Because she was Mou's nanny. Glory from the distant past can be seen faintly from the construction that the school had, but it lacked traces of humans and was all broken down. Chen Chongsheng stood by the lake. He looked at the extremely long wild grasses under his feet and had nothing to say. The reason why he decided to come in and take a look previously was because he remembered reading the records of this school in the Scrolls of Wei. It could be named using the tradition as its prefix. The school had a long history. It used to be an extremely strong and cultivated countless outstanding students. However, why would it become so run down now? The water in the lake was flowing silently. The buildings were old and no one was here. He had many questions to ask, but he did not know who to ask. At this moment, a sound came from behind him. He turned back and saw a black goat. The black goat gave people a weird feeling. If common people were in his situation inside a quiet environment and saw such a black goat, most would subconsciously feel scared or at least they would jump away, but Chen Chongqing didn't. He really liked this black goat. This black goat was very clean just like him. He picked some grass from the side of the lake, took out a handkerchief from his sleeve to wipe the water on the grass, and delivered it to the black goat. The black goat looked at him silently. It turned its head and appeared confused. It was as if it didn't know what Chen Chongqing wanted to do. No one had fed this black goat grass before. Even people like Prince Chen Lu or the prince didn't dare to feed it grass. Everyone in the palace knew that it only ate the fruits you picked by hand. Eat. It doesn't have water so you won't get diarrhea. Chen Chongqing looked at this black goat and shook the grass in hand and said seriously. The black goat understood what this youngster meant. Its look changed a bit as if it just saw an idiot. How would Chen Chongqing know? So he continued to put the green grass up. The black goat felt a bit annoyed but for no reason, it kind of liked this youngster's smell. It hesitated for a while but eventually stepped up and bent down its head a bit. It took several grass from Chen Chongqing's hand and slowly began to eat. Under the tree not so far away, an old lady who had a yellow poplar cane in her hand was looking at the scene. The wrinkles on her face were slightly shaking just like the grass touched by the wind. Even when she saw the previous queen smother the prince, she had not felt this much shock. Chapter 16, A Single Academy. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The reason why the elder woman was shocked was because she knew how prideful and indifferent the black goat was. It was raised by Lady Mo Yen herself. It liked cleanliness so much that it became a strange habit that only the unique unicorns could rival. Not to mention that the wild grass was grown around the lake. The goat wouldn't even look at the food that royal relatives carefully prepare for it, much less this type of grass. But at this moment, it just accepted the wild grass from the newly met youngster and ate it. What the old woman saw next was even more shocking to her. After the black goat finished the wild grass, it didn't leave but instead it rubbed its head against the palm of the youngster. It seemed to like the touch of the young boy. Why is this? The elder woman wrinkled her eyebrows slightly and walked to the lake with the aid of her wooden cane. Looking at the youngster sitting in front of the black goat, she noticed the naturally friendly aura around him. Her mood settled a little, but immediately became insecure. A person who could calm her down like this could be of danger. She had to be alert around him. Chen Chongqing stood up and looked at the elder woman. Madam, is this your goat? The elder lady squinted her eyes slightly. Do you know who I am? Chen Chongqing was a little surprised. No, I do not. The elder lady asked indifferently, then why did you call me madam? Chen Chongqing was confused. He thought, how else can I address a lady of her age? The woman in the carriage of General's mansion was a madam. The dishwasher in the tavern was a madam. Even the chief on the boat was madam. There are countless madams in the world, what is the difference? The elder woman saw his confused expression and realized that she thought too much. She realized that her alertness toward the youngster was unnecessary. She couldn't resist but wrinkle her eyebrows again and felt that something was wrong. She knew that the alertness and indifference present in the few exchanges of lines were originated from her liking of the youngster. This young boy was so ordinary but it was easy for people to be attracted to him. The black goat and herself were both attracted to him easily. Why was this? The elder woman looked at the ruined buildings and thought back to the glorious days of this place. She also thought of the bloody and horrific stories behind it. When she thought of the specialty of this youngster, the insecurity in her heart grew stronger. She decided not to waste any more time and said directly, you can call me Madam Ning. Chen Chongqing bowed and greeted, it's a pleasure to meet you, Madam Ning. Madam Ning said, if you knew that the reason Star Seeker Academy didn't accept you as me, do you still think it is still a pleasure? The cold air of early spring spread when the wind blew across the dense grass. All was silent. Chen Changsheng straightened his back and looked at the elder lady. He was surprised. Yesterday, Tang 36 said in the tavern that the general mansion had no power to influence the Star Seeker Academy, and his result was the command of someone in the royal palace. And this Madame Ning, was she the one? You dare to hold that marriage vow and walk around the capital. I don't know if you are truly brave or just an idiot. Madame Ning said expressionlessly. Chen Changsheng remained silent for a while. No one cares about me besides the general's mansion. Madame Ning said, if people knew that you are the fiancé of the Phoenix girl, millions of people will come to murder you. Chen Changsheng said, I'm still alive, which proves that the general's mansion doesn't want others to know about the existence of this marriage vow. Madame Ning looked at this and asked, what if the general's mansion wants to kill you? Chen Changsheng was silent once again but replied shortly afterward, since the divine queen is in power, they must care about the entire plot. Madame Ning raised her eyebrows slightly. She didn't expect that this 14-year-old youngster could see through the true reason for the careful actions of the general's mansion. As time goes on, the pressure on them will increase. There will be a day that the general's mansion wouldn't want to be cautioned anymore. Then I will resist. Chen Changsheng held the sword handle around his waist tightly. Madame Ning looked at the ordinary short sword around his waist and mocked, you don't know how to Xiuxing and want to use a single short sword to defend against the Xiexingist in the general's mansion. What do you think this short sword is? A legendary weapon. Can it compare to the frozen of the first emperor or the thorn in the hand of the family of Qiu Shan? Chen Changsheng didn't speak. Even if you don't hand back the marriage vow, you can still live. Madame Ning said, but you can't tell any more about the marriage vow. Even if the demon emperor came here himself, your life will perish. This sentence wasn't exactly threatening him because it wasn't a threat. It was just stating a true fact. If the demon emperor couldn't save his life, then no one in the world will be able to protect him. Madame Ning represented the command of the Zhou royal palace. Env Chen Changsheng must admit it, but he felt wronged in that he had no other options. But what Madame Ning said was also good news to him. He just didn't understand. Why did she harshly crush his future in the Star Seeker Academy the day before but now changed her idea? Someone wants you to live and want you to be undisturbed. My lady doesn't like to see a changing variable. Because of this she didn't like you to have a future of possibilities. This used to be a messy situation. Madame Ning looked at the buildings of the classical teaching, which were in ruins. She suddenly smiled and said, who could have thought that you would jump into this exhausted well yourself? Now I can solve this problem. Chen Changsheng's attention was attracted by the latter information of her sentence, therefore he missed the previous words. Future. Possibilities. Exhausted well. Problem. He suddenly grew insecure. From the words of Madame Ning, he felt that walking into classical teaching might be a big mistake. He said without hesitation, I haven't decided to enter the classical teaching. Madame Ning looked at him, you must enter the classical teaching. Why? You walked here yourself, therefore it's your choice. I changed my idea. Sorry, but I'm not Madame Su. Madame Ning looked at him expressionlessly, I can care less if I kill you. Chen Changsheng was silent for a long time. He knew he couldn't reject, but he was still unsatisfied. I didn't take a test or receive an acceptance letter. The classical teaching has no principal or teacher, therefore there is no test. But it can still accept students. Madame Ning took out a thin piece of paper and handed it to him. This is a recommendation letter from the Pope himself. You are able to enter any academy. Without waiting for a reply from Chen Changsheng, she said without emotion, but you can only enter the classical teaching. Chen Changsheng took the paper and looked at the sloppy signature and the fancy yet difficult stamp on the signature. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know that he had the chance to see the signature of the Pope during his life. He should be excited, but it was hard for him to be excited due to the situation he was in. Looking at the color of the signature and the stamp, it wasn't made recently. But the name of the academy was recently filled and should be the work of this Madam Ning. First, don't tell any more about the marriage vow. Second, you will live. Third, no one will disturb your future. Madam Ning looked at him expressionlessly and he responded, deal. After saying all this, she turned around and walked out of the classical teaching. Although the wild grass growing around the lake was tall, it couldn't touch her simple dress. For a person of her status, it's an impossible and meaningless thing for herself to talk to a youngster of 14 years old. The words she previously spoke were true. If a person is dead, what's the point of a marriage vow? Although she thought nicely of the youngster, how many nice youngsters die in the capital every year? If it wasn't for the letter from last night, maybe he would be dead already. If he is a smart person, then he would be able to guess who let him live, and he would know what to do next. It was the best choice for everyone. Maybe except for him, but who cares? Thinking about this, Madam Ning walked further and further away. The black goat followed her. But before they walked out of the door, it turned its head and looked at Chen Changsheng for a moment. Chen Changsheng stood around the lake. He held the piece of paper in his hand and remained silent. Even now he still didn't know the true identity of that Madam Ning, but he was forced to accept a trade. He didn't know the truth behind his trade, but he knew that if he accepted it, it would be beneficial for everyone. He knew more than anything else that maybe others thought he would not benefit from this trade, but in reality he obtained the benefit the moment he held the paper. Therefore he wasn't angry, he was just a little sad. Chen Changsheng's intention of coming to the capital wasn't for the marriage to the girl named Su Yurong. It had no connection with General Mansion, the Royal Palace or other names that had no relation with him. He didn't want anything to do with these places either. The only thing he desired were books, Xiuxing, and the championship of the Great Trail. Before the Great Trail was the semi-trial, and it will be open next month. He didn't know how to Xiuxing and didn't reach purification yet. He would have no chance to pass and obtain the permission to enter the Great Trail. How then will he obtain the championship? Because of this, he had to enter one of the 6 academies on the list. Those 6 academies were the oldest and best academies in the history of the capital. Since there were ivies growing outside of the walls of these academies, they were referred to as the Ivy League. Only the students of the Ivy League were able to enter the Great Trial without going through the semi-trail. Now, he finally became a student of one of the Ivy League. It seemed that his wish was fulfilled, but there was too much ivy growing on the walls of this academy. This was the road his master and senior planned for him before Chen Changsheng left Xining village. But it was clear that they didn't know that the once glorious and historical classical teaching was now in ruins. Chen Changsheng stood around the lake and watched the academy, which was not much different from a graveyard. He couldn't resist but to question his future. After a long time, he woke up in a breeze of spring. After breathing deeply 5 times and pushing out the last bit of discomfort in his body, he folded the thin paper neatly and stored it within his shirt. Chen Changsheng followed the old path in the grassfield and walked towards the depths of the academy. TL Note Bing. I just wonder who the person being nice to him is in the chapter 0.0, the one that didn't want him to die and the words that the MC just ignored. Any guesses, guys? I take my pick to be Su Yurong. Chapter 17, The New Student of the Tradition Academy, Part 1, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chen Changsheng deeply cared about time. Realizing that the one he had to marry was a phoenix, he continuously suffered humiliation and suppression from people with high positions. Even the royal palace appeared. If he was a normal youngster, he probably already would feel extremely depressed or have some mental traumas, but he did not have time to feel upset. He did not have time to get angry because the thing he lacked the most was time. When he sees a goal, Chen Changsheng is the type to go for it without hesitation. He would not think back and forth and he did not need to shout out, but he simply stayed determined and insisted on competing for time. His current goal right now was to obtain the first place on the Great Trial in a year. To him who still did not successfully purify, this goal was truly too far away. Yesterday after he announced his goal in, even the most arrogant and narcissistic Tang 36 was completely wordless. Although others would think the goal to be a dream, Chen Chongqing did not change his mind at all, but instead cherished every second because he knew that this goal was very far away. The Tradition Academy was broken and declined, but so what? The buildings are conquered by green ivies and the stones from them are about to fall off, but so what? Chen Chongqing didn't care, and he didn't have time to care. He determinedly and dedicatedly walked on his own path. He left the lakeside and walked deeper into the school. He was prepared to find people inside and start his school life immediately. After half an hour, he stood in the court alone. The entire ground was filled with wild grasses. He could faintly hear insects humming, but there was only him looking around blankly. He did not find a single soul in the academy. Previously he thought that no matter how broken and deserted the Tradition Academy was, it had at least some teachers or even a janitor. But how could one anticipate that after he searched the entire school, not to talk about man's shadow, he could not even see any traces proving that people had came here recently. There used to be a majestic teaching building behind the center garden of the classical teaching, but now it was all in ruins. Any structures above second floor were destroyed. Only half of the fountain and stone lion was left. A few green plants were growing out of the leftover of the stone lion and blossomed purple flowers, both beautiful and melancholic. It cleared to him that the ruin of the academy wasn't due to the erosion of wind and rain nor the doing of time. There should have been a terrible battle 10 or 20 years ago, and the teaching building was in the radius of the fight. Chen Chongqing thought silently and shook his head. He headed for the relatively persevered building to the right. That building was built with stone and wood and was about several yards tall. The stone wall was full of ivies and moss. The paint on the walls and windows were all gone. It looked extremely poor. There was a label on top of the stone stairs, and it took him quite a while to recognize the words on it. He later determined that the building was probably a library. He walked towards the window and looked into the building. Although the light was a little dim, he still observed the inside clearly. There were shelves upon shelves of books inside. Chen Chongqing was a little surprised because he didn't expect that after years of neglect the classical teaching still had this many books. Even if the tradition didn't confiscated them, did the government not care as well? Book was the first thing he touched in this world and the object that he was most familiar with. Books are just like milk to a baby for normal person as they are for him. He was naturally close to books because it could offer him spiritual comfort. As he was looking at countless books through the window, mysteriously his negative mood turned a little upbeat. He walked to the front door and was about to push in until he saw a bronze lock on the knob. The locket was gray and dull, and it was some old relic. It was hard to tell how long the door was left undisturbed, but the most important thing was that there was a powerful presence inside the locket. Chen Chongqing thought there was a strong enchant in the locket. No wonder after the classical teaching was left neglected for so many years, its storage of literature was still perfectly safe from thieves and bandits. After realizing this, his mood got even better. But he didn't know how to open the locket because he didn't have the key. He also didn't know if there was still a key. Even if there was a key, where is it? Whose hand was it in? He didn't even know who to ask because there was no one in the academy to ask. But he wasn't bothered because even though he couldn't enter, no one could either. Following his previous path, he walked towards the dorms of the academy. The dorms consisted of dozens of small buildings, and they were a big part of the campus. Everywhere tall greens and ivies were growing. Perhaps it was a nice environment back in the days, but now it's kind of gloomy and dark. He randomly chose a door and opened it. The first thing he experienced was the musty smell. He saw the dust and spider web and decided to break the window inside the room. He realized that it will be hard to clean and will take a long to organize. He shook his head and left. Chen Chongsheng thought it would be a long time before he could move from the tavern to here. Standing on the stone path outside of the small building and looking at the dense forest covering the sun and sky, he heard the chirping of the insects and birds. He felt the gloomy setting of the dark forest and felt that the truth was lost in time. Chen Chongsheng slowly closed his eyes. 10 or 20 years ago, countless talented young students were walking on the stone path shoulder to shoulder or sitting on the chairs together. Sometimes there would be clashing of swords in the forest. Everywhere was filled with the chanting of the scroll of the way. Sometimes laughter could be heard from the small buildings behind him. From far away, the sound of the bell from the royal palace could be heard and the students were running happily with bowls in their hands. He opened his eyes and all of these scenes vanished. The only things left were the lonely forest and the small buildings that had been destroyed. The classical teaching was located in the very center of the capital and was the neighbor of the royal palace, but it had been forgotten by the entire world. The once happy and glorious place was gone. The laughter and chatting was nowhere to be found. There was only him standing alone in the forest. He suddenly felt sad, but it was only for a short duration. This feeling quickly vanished from within him. He felt nice here, if he could see those images once again. Chen Chongsheng was able to see the peak of the classical teachings. He was able to see the talented young students and the images from the past. It's not because he had some special abilities or because he was daydreaming, it was because he read literatures and stories about this academy. He pulled down the ivies from the stone walls of the academy and saw the label, Classical Teaching. Many records of the scroll of the way flashed into his head and transformed into actual information. These information became images which were carved into his brain. Chen Chongsheng suddenly realized he actually knew a lot about the history and events of this school. It was not complicated or hard for Chen Chongsheng. If he could remember the most insignificant note in the law of the Heavenly Academy and the complex military rule of the Star-Seeker Academy, then it's only natural that he also remembered some history and legacy of the classical teaching. The 3000 scroll of the way contained too many information. Maybe he was the only student of the classical teaching and maybe, as Madame Ning mentioned, it didn't even have a teacher. But since he was going to start studying in the classical teaching, then he must start working. For example, he needs to obtain the key to the library. He needs to request for fundings. He remembered very clearly, the Zhou government gave every school educational fundings. If the academy exists, then the funding will be given yearly. The Star-Seeker obtain their share through the military while the classical teaching receive their share from the Department of Traditional Education. The lucky thing was, the key and name list of the classical teaching should also be stored and saved there. Chen Chongsheng left the classical teaching and followed the instruction on the map. Not for long, he arrived at the Department of the Traditional Education. It was a relatively unnoticeable building. There were only 30 steps of stone stairs in front of it. Although the columns were very tall, they were still very unnoticeable because there were dozens of evergreen planted outside of the building and covered the whole scene up. No matter how bright the daylight was, it was hard to light up everything inside. The Department of Traditional Education's entrance had very little people. After a long time, a priest wearing black robe would occasionally pass by. Chen Chongsheng walked up the staircase and felt a bit strange. Then he noticed that behind the building there was a very crowded place. Many people were chatting about something there. Walking into the Department of Traditional Education, he found the related officers and said, "I want to get student roster and key." "What student roster and key?" That officer murmured with his eyes slightly narrowed. His face was chubby and contemptuous, but not to look down instead simply because he almost fell asleep in the spring wind dreaming about something fantastic. Chen Chongsheng increased his volume and said, "The Tradition Academy's student roster and key." The officer slowly opened up his eyes, yawned, walked to the window, and washed his face. Finally having a clearer mind, he walked back to the desk and looked at Chen Chongsheng irritated. He took out files from the drawer and said, "Say your school's name again." This time, Chen Changsheng paid more attention on pronunciation and said with a clear articulation and a mellow and full tone, "The Tradition Academy." That officer did not even think. He felt that this name was completely strange. He stopped looking in the file, looked up at Chen Changsheng, frowned and said, "Since when does the capital have such school? Is it registered? Did it pay all the taxes? Who authorized it? It's not a new school, it's the Tradition Academy." The Tradition Academy. That officer frowned and thought for a while, feeling that he had heard this name before but couldn't remember. In the past 10 years, he had made countless contacts with various schools in the capital, but he never heard a school named the Tradition Academy. Suddenly, he remembered. Chen Changsheng did not know what happened. That officer said with a slightly cold voice, "Are you joking?" Chen Changsheng felt a bit strange, thinking that what kind of jokes are you trying to make? That officer stood up suddenly, heavily pat the desk and shouted, "Do you think this is a place for jokes?" Chen Changsheng wanted to say something but didn't get a chance. That officer angrily scolded. "Which school are you from? How dare you make fun of teachers?" Chen Changsheng said innocently. "I am really a student of the Tradition Academy." That officer looked at him as if he was staring at an idiot and said, "Lie, keep lying." Chapter 18, The New Student of the Tradition Academy, Part 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Let's not talk about the southern sect yet, but only the northern one. The tradition was located in the capital. There are 6 holy churches and the talented church is the one responsible for educating the youth. It included the regulation of Heavenly Academy, classical teaching, priest academy, and dozens of other schools. The talented church was actually in the same department as the Zhou educational system. The Holy Educational Department was the common title that citizens called the department. Since the department represented power, religion, and knowledge, no one bothered to offend it and it worked in peace. Chen Changsheng stood in the empty hallway and was covered in the shade of the giant stone column. He turned his head back towards the room and remembered the yelling of the officer. He thought to himself, the quality of the building of the Holy Church was for sure exquisite. Its soundproof system was so perfect that no one outside of the room heard the yelling of the officer. There were more than 10,000 of students in the capital and they were all under the regulation of officers and officials in this building. It's easy to say that they were extremely busy most of the time. Above the shiny malphite floor, countless feet wore all kinds of boots and moved around the building. Although the crowd was like waves in the sea, there were no noise besides the footsteps. No one took notice of the youngster under the shade of the stone column and no one voluntarily went to talk to him. A long time had passed and the sun had moved from the east to the west. The shade finally moved from his body to an eastern position. It wasn't until afternoon that someone noticed his presence. Maybe because the Holy Church was almost closing, people's mind got a little bit loose. Different kind of voices started to appear in the building and wasn't as quiet as it was in the morning. A whisper was heard behind Chen Changsheng. The whisper was so low that it sounded like rats were biting on something and made his ear itchy. Instinctively Chen Changsheng lowered his head even more. What is that youngster doing standing there? I think he stood there for almost the entire day. Oh, you talking about that kid? I asked around during lunch and heard he got yelled at by Officer Xian. They say he was here to request of this year's educational funding and wanted to pick up some stuff. Funding? Wasn't it already released by February? Which of the academies didn't get their share? It's impossible. Judging from the aggressive style of those academy principals, if we actually owed them money, they definitely can't endure it until today. Besides, even if we did owe them, why would they send a student to pick up the funding? I agree. That's why Officer Xian didn't care what he said and told him to leave at once. But I don't know why this youngster is still unwilling to leave. Which academy is this kid from? I heard it's the classical teaching. What? The classical teaching. There was a wowing in the crowd and then came laughter. This joke sure is meaningless. No wonder Officer Xian was so mad. Who doesn't know that classical teaching has been empty for so long? There ain't even any teachers left, speak less of students. I guess it's just some pranks for the freshmen in some academies, and that kid was unlucky enough to be picked by the seniors. They commanded him to pick up some stuff from us or he wouldn't be able to pass the prank. Well, these welcoming parties sure are becoming less and less logical and respectful. For sure. They even dare to come to the Holy Educational Department to pull off some pranks. Ugh, so which academy do you guys think this kid is really from? Aside all this prank seems to be interesting nonetheless. Should be the Starseeker Academy. That youngster has been standing there for the entire day and his posture didn't change once. What kind of academy besides Starseeker could have this kind of student? I think not. The military rules in the Starseeker are extremely strict. The welcoming pranks in the past few years at most were stealing some darts from the supply camp. Why would they come to the Holy Educational Department? I think the best bet would be the Heavenly Academy. The students in that academy are familiar with this place and are not afraid of it. Even if they do get in trouble, the kids just need to call their family to help them out. The department wouldn't go into a big mess with such small things. In the eyes of these officers, that youngster with his head down standing in the hallway should be some sad newcomer who got bullied by his seniors. When they are discussing, they forgot to avoid Chen Changsheng. Even though their voices were low, they were still heard clearly by the youngster. Chen Changsheng had his head down looking at the ground. His shadow constantly moved on the ground. When it was about to touch the stairs, he realized that he wasted half a day waiting and felt a little gloomy. After hearing these discussions, he realized why previously people were so mad and did not allow him to go in. How could he make the other believe him that he was actually the first freshman of the Tradition Academy after so many years? Even if they believed in it, how could he, in the shortest time, get the keys to the library, the roster of the school staffs, the school seal and the money from them? He did not want to waste time like he did today waiting to be received. There was a bell coming far away from the direction of the royal palace. Moments later music came from the direction of the mausoleum of the books. Chen Changxing thought of something, looked up, walked to the room that he kicked him out before unhesitatingly. Such sudden actions drew many people's attention immediately. He pushed the door and went in. He walked to the table and spoke to the person behind the table. "Hi, I want to get the Tradition Academy's roster, key, and money." That person was the Officer Xian that people previously mentioned in the discussion. Watching Chen Changxing leave and return, he became angry. He slammed down on the table and yelled. "I told you to stop bothering me. How dare you to say this again? Do you really want me to get people to hit you 20 sticks and then expelled you from school?" Chen Changxing said seriously. "Then you have to let me become an official student first." Officer Xian took a deep inhale. He suppressed his own anger and said coldly, "Which school are you from?" Chen Changxing said. "The Tradition Academy." When he said this, his emotion was very calm. No matter what, he was going to insist on. No matter what you ask, he could always calmly repeat that answer. "I am a new student from the Tradition Academy, it doesn't matter if you believe me or not, I am standing here and I will. No matter the Tradition Academy, or the Heavenly Academy." Officer Xian felt that he was going to get crazy. "Even if you are Prince Chen Lu's younger brother, today I will still let you know the consequence of ignoring teachers. Here is my recommendation letter." Chen Changxing took out that thin sheet from his clothes and left it on the table. Officer Xian originally wanted to grab the sheet and rub it into a cluster and then push it into this annoying youngster's mouth. But before he did, he glimpsed a familiar name on the sheet. He was dumbfounded and subconsciously took the paper to confirm that he did not hallucinate the name. This name and handwriting indeed looked somewhat familiar. Where did I see this name and this handwriting? Officer Xian frowned as he pondered hard, but he couldn't find the answer. Deep down in his heart he faintly felt insecure. Then he suddenly realized whose name that was and whose handwriting it was. Although he never saw the handwriting on the paper and never saw that name first person, he knew the name and the handwriting. The reason why it's familiar was because the name of the Department of Traditional Education had the same handwriting as the words on the paper. While that name was known to every disciple of the tradition, but it could not be discussed and written because that name that was already divine. The following moment, Officer Xin saw clearly the red stamp on the paper. He felt that his legs suddenly lost their power and they faintly twitched. He had acrophobia and such symptoms only occurred when he went to visit Moon Temple in the Palace of Intellectuals. Officer Xin wanted to take a drink of tea but his hands were shaking so badly that he dropped the cup on the floor. He looked towards Chen Chongsheng and his lips slightly quivered. He could not control himself at all nor his voice. At this point he eventually believed that Chen Chongsheng was a freshman of the Tradition Academy because no one dared to forge the name on the paper to lie about that miracle. Actually. You, in respect form in Chinese, haven't taken this letter out. You are a really humorous kid. He looked at Chen Chongsheng and put a lot of effort to smile. He wanted to tap the youngster's shoulder, but he did not dare to. The word you, in respect form, was not related to being a child at all and it was even more awkward to describe a child as humorous. Chen Chongsheng understood why Officer Xin would act so ludicrously now. He felt somewhat helpless and explained. I was going to take it out before, but you never gave me a chance. Sit please, tea will be up later. I am going to get the things ready for you. Officer Xin took the paper and greeted him enthusiastically. He then unhesitatingly turned and walked out and began to run speedily in the empty but stern hall. The people that followed Chen Chongsheng did not expect to see such a scene and felt very surprised. In the depth of the Holy Educational Department, or known as the Talented Church, there located the largest room in the entire territory. Inside were diverse kinds of plants and flowers. Some were blooming while some were dying. But most of them are waiting patiently in their buds. It seemed like all of the flowers in the world were concentrated here. In the depth of the flower forest was a huge scripture. Carved upon it was the scene of the appearance of the books. In front of the scripture was a large writing table. Officer Xin stood in front of the writing table. His expression showed that he was clearly nervous and sweats were running down his forehead. But it was clear that he wasn't as embarrassed as before when he was in front of Chen Chongsheng. He said, in the name of Divine Queen that I swear to heaven, I really didn't know that he brought such a recommendation letter, or I would have. Or you would have done what? Or you wouldn't have let that kid stand in the hallway for an entire day. Another officer stood up behind the writing table. It was hard to tell his age, but his eyes were full of wisdom and kindness. From the style of his dress, he should be the Pope of the Talented Church. This means that he was the most powerful figure in the entire Talented Church, but it was hard to tell from his soft expression and kind speeches. The stamp and the signature on this letter is all real. The color of the writing and the folding of the letter are all authentic, but most importantly is this paper. The handwriting of the Pope is truly beautiful. Even after viewing it many times, I'm still impressed by it. I remember 10 years ago when the Pope was invited by the Divine Queen to teach the Prince and Lady Mo Yen. TL Bing. So I am guessing that Mo Yen that you saw before is a princess based on this comment. The Pope of the Talented Church was named Mei Li Sha. He looked at his personal officer and suddenly the smile on his face vanished. He said coldly, fine, these old things shouldn't be brought up again. It doesn't matter what's the background of this young student Chen Chongsheng, nor does it matter if he's the first student of the classical teaching for 10 years. The important thing is, what does this event represent? Is the Pope planning to reopen the classical teaching? If it's true, how should we, the subordinates, react and help him? All of these you need to realize and learn. Learn about its meaning and spirit. Chapter 19, The New Student of the Tradition Academy, Part 3, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Learn whose spirit? The Pope's. What spirit? Officer Xian then thought to a deeper level and wondered why the Pope gave his approval. Even after he looked into the deepest part of his soul, he would only understand a tiny bit of what the Pope's intentions were out of the vastness of his plans that were as vast as the Milky Way. When Officer Xian walked out of the Archbishop's room, his face was pale from thinking about Archbishop's comment, and it didn't calm him down at all. He had a few conjectures on what the purpose of the Pope was, but he wasn't sure what was correct and what was wrong. Did the Pope really decide to revitalize the Tradition Academy? Why wasn't there any sign in the capital? Why would he pick such a young student to do such thing? The most important issue was, without the historical problem of the Tradition Academy resolved, who dared to touch this part? As he got closer to Qin Chongsheng's location, he had to make up his mind and come up with a decision. When he was about 10 footsteps away from the room, he had made up his mind on his plan of actions and made a fake smile. Here are the roster and the key, but you probably don't know, even if there are actually anyone on the roster, we can hardly find them. Qin Chongsheng took the roster and flipped through it. He saw that the pages were very old and that next to most names there was a word left. He asked, then what should I do? Officer Xian thought, how is this my problem? Although he said that to himself, he absolutely couldn't speak it out loud. He had already decided that he would not support the Traditional Academy and not get involved in the plans of superpowers. He would fulfill his duties that were within his range of powers that were provided to him, like giving money and giving people if Qin Chongsheng required. You think, studying in the Tradition Academy, what do you still need now? He looked into Qin Chongsheng's eyes and asked tentatively. Whatever I want. If you want me to send the teachers at the Heavenly Academy to the Tradition Academy, then I probably can't. Officer Xian laughed and said. He knew that what he just said was not humorous, but rather appeared somewhat helpless. Qin Chongsheng said, I want people. Officer Xian's smile gradually faded and said seriously, how many? Qin Chongsheng replied seriously, a large amount. Officer Xian's face didn't change, but his two hands were gradually getting cold. He thought that it was really what the Archbishop had guessed. The Pope's attempt at revitalizing the Tradition Academy must have hidden objectives. Otherwise, why would the first thing this young student asked was people and asked for so many? If there was really something that violated the taboo, what should he do? Can I ask why do you want so many people? He said each word seriously and carefully and stared into Qin Chongsheng's eyes. Although Officer Xian's face was extremely serious, he was prepared to refute his statement and run right away quickly. Qin Chongsheng did not feel his nervousness. Even if he did, he could not understand. The Tradition Academy is not small. Most buildings are too old and broken. The buildings can be fixed slowly, but to study in the building it needs to be cleaned. If I don't have enough people to do the work, then it will take away a lot of time from my studying. When Officer Xian heard this, he took a deep breath, not due to fear but surprise. Worrying that Qin Chongsheng would regret, he said unhesitatingly. The needed revenues will be given immediately, and the needed workers will also be sent out. I will then send some miscellaneous affairs over. No, actually, I will take them myself to you. After he said this, he friendly pat Qin Chongsheng's shoulder, held Qin Chongsheng's arms, and walked him out of the Department of Traditional Education. The scene drew many attention from the surroundings because the usually serious Officer Xian was actually being so kind to such a young-looking student. This scene sparked many discussions in the department. Qin Chongsheng actually went in the Tradition Academy. Yes. After Nanny Ning left, he shortly went to the Department of Traditional Education. The study room located inside the Dongyu General's mansion fell silent immediately after the short exchange. Su Shiji's face was indifferent and he looked at the worrisome Nanny Hua. Since it's that side's intention, then don't worry about it for now. Madame Su, who was worried, said, why was there such a sudden change? Su Shiji said, I asked her to help solve the issue with Startacre Academy. It was not for that little kid. Sacrificing such a big favor, I originally wanted to tell this engagement to her. I had hoped that she would report it to the Divine Queen, but she took it in her own hands, and whatever she does is reasonable. Madame Su was still worried and said, the problem is what Nanny Ning said, leave that kid alive. Why would the palace care about him? Su Shiji glanced at Nanny Hua. Nanny Hua looked down and whispered, last night, Shuang Er went to the palace saying that the lady sent a letter regarding him. Madame Su heard this and was a little unpleased. This kid, why did she send a letter for some stranger instead of her parents? Su Shiji wrinkled his eyebrows. He didn't want to hear this talk. Marriage is a big thing that only parents can take part in and speak. Even the Divine Queen herself wouldn't mind this kind of business. So what are you worrying about? Let's give some way to Lady Mo Yen and let that youngster live. If he still won't stay down, then we can rediscuss this matter again. Lady Su said, I'm just afraid that this kid may actually be successful and powerful in the future. If he does, then what happens if he wants to take revenge on the mansion? Su Shiji suddenly laughed. The laugh held a mystery that made the others feel like there was more to the situation and the event than what they thought it was. Powerful and successful. Lady Xu looked at his smile and was a little afraid. She didn't dare ask any further and waved her hand at Nanny Hua for her to leave. She said in a lower voice, previously Prince Chen invited you to a gathering, are you going to attend or not? Although he is well liked by the Divine Queen, his status is still a bit special. I feel it would be inappropriate. Many years ago, after the last rebel of the royals was put down by the Divine Queen's bloody actions, all of the people who contained royal bloodline has been expelled from the capital and were sent to different provinces for inspection and watch. Only Prince Chen was allowed to stay in the prince mansion of the capital due to his young age. Perhaps it was due to his young age, the Divine Queen allowed him to enter the palace and study with the princess and Lady Mo Yen. These two lived together, drank together, and ate together. They created a strong bond between each other, and the Divine Queen watched him grow up. Therefore she liked him a lot. Even after Chen became an adult, the Divine Queen didn't expel him from the capital but instead granted him a prince status. Of course, besides the long-term relationship and the good reputation, many people thought the reason that the Divine Queen treated Prince Chen so well was because the Prince Lu reminded her of her dead sons. But no matter what, Prince Chen was still a member of the royal family. His blood was that of a royals. No one doubted that the Divine Queen was still suspicious of him. Because of this, it would be inappropriate for Su Shiji to have supper with Prince Chen when Su Shiji was a general that served under the Divine Queen. After listening, Su Shiji stayed silent for a moment and said, it's fine. The prince has invited me multiple times, if I still don't go due to my status, the prince will surely be unhappy and the palace may speak negatively of me. They will call me an official who doesn't interact is not a good official. Besides, the Divine Queen sees through everything. She knows that the reason Prince Chen wants to contact me is to create a relationship with the family of Qiu Shan so they can take care of his father living in the south. Since this is out of filial obedience, why would the Divine Queen care? In addition, the father of Chen stayed down for his entire life. It wouldn't be unexpected for her to directly summon him back into the capital. Lady Su didn't speak a word, but she was a little nervous. She knew Su Shiji's personality more than anymore else. He always stayed quiet and never expressed his feeling about anything, but now he spoke so much to explain this. For sure it wasn't meant for her, then who is he explaining to? It was easy to understand that even himself was unsure of the meaning and liability of these words. But even then, he still wants to attend the invite of Prince Chen. What did this mean? After Su Shiji finished his sentence, he wrinkled his eyebrows and noticed he behaved unusually. After calming down a little, he looked at his wife and smiled, you don't have to worry that kid won't have any future. The reason that Lady Mo Yen made him enter the classical teaching was to destroy his future. Although the name of classical teaching may seem terrific, it was prefixed, classical. It sure wouldn't be worse than the Heavenly Academy or the Star Seeker Academy. In fact, in the previous several hundred years or even before that, the classical teaching was the best and the hardest academy to enter in the capital. But now, the classical teaching is in ruins and forgotten by everyone. It had no reputation inside the educational field. If it stayed silent like the previous years it was fine, but if a little action was heard from it, it would be mocked by everyone. Why else would the teachers and students all leave the academy in such a short period of time? The reason that the classical teaching had fallen into ruins was all due to an event that happened several decades ago. That year the principal of the classical teaching was an archbishop of the tradition and the senior of the pope. His status in the tradition was only lower than that of the pope and was respected all over the world. Even the Virgin of the Southern sect was placed below him. It was truly an exception in the history of the tradition. Speaking logically, after arriving to a status like this principle of the classical teaching, he should be more than satisfied. But the human heart was just like the stars in the night sky, it was hard to count and understand. After trying to obtain the position of the Pope but failed to win the support of the Divine Queen, he got help from the royals and tried to rebel against the ruling of the Divine Queen and lost miserably in one night. The principle was defeated by the Pope and a massacre occurred in the classical teaching. There were people who tried to restore the Academy's former glory after that one night. But under the eyes of the Divine Queen and Pope, no students who graduated from the classical teaching could have a bright future. Only after 2 years, no student attended the classical teaching and the only thing teachers could do was to leave. Just like this, the once glorious and prestigious became a gloomy ghost academy. Only until several decades later, the classical teaching welcomed a new student. The name of that new student was Qin Changsheng. Accepted. No, that's expelled. New student. No, that's an abyss of no return. Ze Tian Ji concluded expressionlessly.